appointed hour has arrived, and it's time for me to greet you and welcome you to this conference. My name is Chuck Tooley. I am the chairman of the board of the Wheeler Center. And one of the things I'd like to do first is to introduce my fellow board members. And I would like you all to stand. Would you please? Fellow board members, Wheeler Center for Public Policy. Let's give them a hand. So the mission statement of the Wheeler Center says that we are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization offering Montanans the opportunity to hear and to discuss critical issues from various points of view in order to enable the development of informed public policy in Montana. Some of our conferences have included the graying of Montana, the new economy, the cost of water, early childhood education, divisiveness in democracy, campaign financing, and the future of coal, which was our last conference in Billings. And today, as you know, our conference is titled Ensuring the Strength of Montana's Agricultural Economy, Responding to Climate Variability. We're so glad that you could join us today. We look forward to a great conference, and now it's my pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the Wheeler Center for Public Policy, Dr. Eric Austin, who will lead us through the rest of the afternoon's agenda. Eric? Let's give him a hand.
Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate that. Thank you for coming out this afternoon and tomorrow. I'm looking forward to a series of hopefully not only interesting but fruitful conversations. Before we dive into the content of today's sessions, I just want to say a quick thank you, but very heartfelt thank you to several partners who have been really critical in putting the program together and pulling this event off. And foremost among them are the Montana Farm Bureau Federation and the Montana Grain Growers Association. I know that John Youngberg is here. If you could wave and say hello. I'm hoping Lola Raska is here as well. I reached out to both John and Lola maybe 6 months ago or so and said, hey, we've got this idea for a conference. We've been working with our board to develop the idea. But this is not an audience necessarily that we have directly worked with in the past, and we want to really make sure that we reach out to producers and others that are really directly engaged in agriculture in the state, and structure the program in such a way that this has got some practical use for folks. And they have been really helpful in again, both putting together the program and reaching out to folks across the state to come. The other entity that I want to recognize as well is MSU's Extension, and I know Cody is here somewhere. There he is. Extension and Cody's new associate director, Suzanne, have been really helpful to us as well, kind of along the same lines. Technical difficulties. So thank you to all of you for your support, and as you see them throughout the course of today and tomorrow, please let them know that their support has been appreciated also. I have two, I guess one other piece of business that I want to just do real quickly before we get into the content, and that is just to remind folks that we do have a reception at 5 following the second of our not really panel, but our discussion session that's scheduled for this afternoon. Just an opportunity to relax and celebrate a little bit. So I hope you are able to stay and join us for that reception. If you haven't found them, one sort of logistical piece of information, restrooms are down the hall on the right. We'll have two sort of content sessions this afternoon. Each will last about 90 minutes with a little bit of a break in between those. So that's the sort of the logistical business. On that note, I want to shift and pull the projector back up here. We were sent a welcoming message by Senator Tester, so I want to pull that up and share that with you before I introduce our next welcoming speaker. So one moment.
Greetings from the U.S. Senate, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. I'd like to recognize the folks and sponsors in the room who worked so hard to put this event together and for your dedication to strengthening Montana's economy. It is no secret that agriculture is our state's top industry and the backbone of life in rural communities. As a farmer, I know firsthand just how critical family farm agriculture is to our rural way of life. And I'm committed to making sure Montana's farmers and ranchers continue producing the food that feeds the world. Farming and ranching has never been easy. We've had to deal with weather, we've had to deal with disease, and we need a lot of luck to take a crop from seeding to market. There's a lot of outside control on us. The last thing we need is more uncertainty. But unfortunately, President Trump has put us into a trade war with China. This trade war has impacted our prices, and we're at 40-year lows. And now we're relying on taxpayer-funded bailouts, which don't even come close to offsetting the losses, putting everything at risk. Family farm agriculture is the backbone of our industry, and I've been on my family farm since the late 1970s. And ever since, I've heard this get big or get out. It's come out of the land-grant universities, it's come out of agribusiness, and it's come out of production agriculture. That is exactly the wrong message. The right message is diversify or get out. So we need to have a farm economy that's diversified. The same way my grandparents were diversified when they homesteaded my farm. We need to be raising pulse crops. We need to be raising grain. We need to be integrating livestock into our ecosystem on the farm. And the elephant in the room is climate change. Now, I've personally benefited in the last 5 years, but because of the volatility in our weather patterns, that could change on a whim, and I'd be out of business. So you all know better than anyone that we need to work together to find solutions to these pressing problems before it's too late. Thank you for all you do, and please keep in touch.
So at this point, I would like to invite our nearly brand new VP and Dean for the College of Agriculture at MSU, Shrika Labajwa, to join us for a moment and say a few words as well.
Thank you, Eric. I am very, very pleased to be here today. How are you all? Good, good. I see very many familiar faces here and many unfamiliar faces. So welcome to the Wheeler Center Conference. If you are from outside of Bozeman, welcome to Bozeman, and take some time to visit our great university, MSU here. And at the topic of this conference, so that is very important to me and our entity, the MSU Agriculture. The future of Montana agriculture under this changing weather patterns. Wouldn't we all like to know with the good certainty what it is going to be? And I have to say, I came from a rural farming community in India, and agriculture is always dealing with the great levels of uncertainty, unlike, if it is manufacturing or any other business. Agriculture is all about uncertainty. It is uncertainty about weather, about the pest. So I am looking for a good answer, what this group of experts are going to come up with, what is the future of Montana agriculture is going to be. And I see Tim sitting there. Last week, and Tim was there too, and we were talking to a friend of the college. And in the conversation, climate change came up. And this person said, you can find fossils from where I am in Montana. And that means, the climate and the landscape has been very different at that time when the dinosaurs were roaming Montana. That is very true. You think logically, today's landscape wouldn't support these plant-eating dinosaurs. But my question is, do we want to be the dinosaurs? Our agriculture business, we want to see it as a dinosaur extinct in some number of years or whatever time frame you look at. The MSU Agriculture, the College of Agriculture and the Montana Agricultural Experiment Station is working. Our objective is, weather is variable, whether you call it climate change or weather variability, it all has to do with the timeline and what geography you are looking at. We are here to look at what are the challenges our agriculture is facing and how to position it and how to provide the economic advantage our agriculture need to survive for many, many, many years to come. So, we are already doing quite a bit of things in the college and in the experiment station. We are developing new varieties, Since the day I came, I see some of our commodity board members here. Since the day I joined Montana State, I heard about the sawflies. And sawflies were probably not such a problem if you look 20 or 25 years back. And I before coming here, I was working in North Dakota. In North Dakota, north of I-94, nobody heard of growing corn. Corn was never there. And I have seen today corn growing up to Manitoba. So, the weather patterns are changing, the uncertainty is there. And we are working on animal genetics that would be best suited for our environment here. But it will be good to know if the experts can agree on what are going to be the changes we can anticipate and where we should be moving our agriculture. That would greatly help we as a scientist who is trying to come up with the tools that can help the agriculture system in this state and our farmers and our state. So I want to say I am looking forward to the consensus of this group. I know that some of our faculty are also talking. The consensus of this group to help us move forward MSU agriculture. So with that, once again, I want to welcome you and thank you for the opportunity to come and say a few words to you. And thanks, Eric here and the Wheeler Center and the organizers and the sponsors of this event. Discussions like this is very, very important for Montana agriculture. Thank you.
So the challenge and the need is pretty clear. And without further ado, what I'd like to do at this point is invite our first panel to join us here at the table, and I will turn the microphone over to them so that we can begin to get into the meat of our conversations.
Is there an order? I'll let you guys play on those to decide what order you would like to go. Yeah, I'll pull that up. Didn't really designate a moderator necessarily, so I'll let you guys kind of handle that however you're comfortable. And if you decide it's time to sort of throw the mic to the audience for Q&A, we'll go that direction. Okay, so let me get, you can go first, Tim, is that sure? So how that works? Can we dim it a little bit? The lights. Yeah. Can you circle one off?
Yeah, that'll work. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm Tim Del Curto. I'm a professor and an endowed chair in the Department of Animal and Range Science. today I'm basically going to talk about Montana's beef industry real quick and talk about our research program. Just as a qualification before I get started, I want to let you know that I currently have about 7 grad students, and I co-advise 5 of the 7 with other faculty. I have a research associate working for me and a wonderful departmental faculty and staff. So I've found that success in life isn't really how smart I am, but it's surrounding myself with really good people, and I've done that. So I talk about this, but I don't mention those students. Keep in mind that there's a big team of folks doing this research. We're pretty proud of what we're getting established here at Montana State University. Just an overview, and I think most of you know this, but sometimes I think you have to sort of reacquaint yourself with just what the beef cattle industry is. In the United States, the beef cattle industry represents a group of people, and it was interesting, you had a conference about the grain of ag. The average age of a beef producer across the United States is 58 years of age. Sometimes generational change is one of our biggest challenges. This one will surprise you. We have over 700,000 beef cattle producers, and of that, 91% are family owned. And that's not often portrayed in the public because most of our family owned operations incorporate. And they do that for a number of reasons, mostly for generational change and things like that and tax benefits. But the reality is when you actually look into them, most of them are still family owned, and it's a big portion of the fabric of this country. Average size beef cattle ranch, this may surprise you as well, is 40 head of cows. And some of our biggest states are states like Missouri and Kentucky, where the average size of the ranch there might be 20 head of cows. And so it's an industry that's a bit different than perhaps, what you're told about or what you perceive sometimes from the press. There's 27,000 feedlot operations. 80% of those are family owned. 64,000 dairies, but this number is declining rapidly. And in fact, right now in America, consumption of fluid milk has been declining rapidly, and with that, we're seeing a reduction in our dairy herd that reflects that. And like I said, a good source of information, if you're ever interested in this, is just National Cattlemen's Beef Association. In Montana, agriculture is our leading industry. Sometimes we flip-flop a bit with wheat, but for the most part, of that, beef cattle is, trades places, but generally is top. Montana's the number 7 state in the United States, and we have 1.5 million head of beef cattle. And that's producing females. I think it's way cool because there's only 1 million people in this state, so for every person we have 1.5 cows. And I like states like that. It makes me really comfortable. We're also, in this part you probably don't know, we're the number 1 seed stock producing state. And because the U.S. has the most efficient and largest beef production industry in the world based on red meat production, that sort of by default makes Montana the world leader in seed stock production, particularly as it relates to Angus cattle. Okay, we're a bit unique that way. 20% of all Angus bulls that are marketed in the U.S. come from Montana, and animal agriculture is the top state commodity with a bit over $2 billion in 2018. 27,500 farms and ranches in Montana that generate at least $1,000 in annual sales. And this industry is dominated by what I'd refer to as extensive beef cattle operations. And those are operations where the cattle and the management are fit to the environment we work with. It's something unique about the beef cattle industry and something I'll touch on a bit more. We always get questions about, what's the future of the beef cattle industry look like in the West or the United States and things like that. And one of my first things, and perhaps this is a high elevation view, but the most abundant carbohydrate on this planet is cellulose. And cellulose is basically the plant fibers that give plant structure. Okay, and these plants right here, this is just rangeland, bunchgrass rangelands. In January, believe it or not, the cellulose component of those grasses can be roughly about 70% of the dry weight of the grasses. What makes that unique is the primary species of life on this planet that can utilize cellulose is bacteria. And it's that unique relationship between ruminants and bacteria that allows them to digest this. And so the only use that we have for this, and the only way we can use it is have some ruminant animal eat it, the bacteria in the rumen then convert that to something that ultimately the animal can eat. So I always tell people, as long as we have plant life, plant matter, cellulose, we have a ruminant livestock industry. Which type of ruminant that's going to dominate really depends on consumer preference. You know, so sheep, goats, cattle, bison, you know, deer, elk, all those things are ruminant animals. It's what makes them unique. You think about, though, production systems in the West, and there's other things that make it unique and a bit challenging, and that's kind of why we're here today. You know, one of them is this map right here. Everything here in brown in the West is 1,000 meters in elevation. And we don't often think about this, but because of our elevation, we have relatively short growing seasons. Montana, 80% of the state of Montana is above 1,000 meters in elevation. It's, you know, a little bit over 3,000 foot elevation. And on average, most of our growing seasons are anywhere from 90 to 120 days. What that really means to a beef cattle producer is for 2/3 of the year, they're dealing with a forage base that's dormant or senesced. It's not actively growing. And it becomes challenging then because in many cases that forage resource doesn't meet the needs of their animals. So it's a bit more challenging. To make matters worse, this is just a precip map of the United States, and everything here in yellow is less than 20 inches of precip, and these lighter yellows are 10 inches or less. Okay, so most of the West is arid to semi-arid climates, and it's these climates that typically show the highest degree of variation. And based on climate change models, are the ones that are going to likely show even more extreme variation. And so it's just things to think of. Also, it's these areas that are low precip and those high elevation areas that make up our primary beef production areas of the West. So it's challenging. It's not an easy job for these ranches to deal with this kind of an environment. I'm going to go through this really quick because I think they want us to be relatively quick, but I flew into some meetings in Dallas, Texas in December of 2011. It was kind of the start of the really bad drought there. And I remember flying into Dallas, and there's no leaves on the trees that year. And the trees didn't leave out at all because of that drought. And I thought, man, I need to get a picture of this. And so I went to the USDA Drought Monitor site and picked that up. And what transpired is a drought that continued really on until this year. But it moved. This is 2011, and in Texas it was extreme. By the way, there's 5 million head of mother cows in Texas, or there was at this time. Now there's about 4.5 because they had to destock and change their management. Here's 2 years later. That drought was still in Texas, but it moved to the west. Still very severe, and also kind of moved into the central states. Here it is in 2015. California got hit hard. I managed a branch research station at the time up in northeastern Oregon, and it was awful. We had about 2 million acres burned that summer. Really tough time. And about that time, Montana State came to me and recruited me for an endowed chair. I thought, God, I'm going to get out of this dry place and go someplace where it's wetter. And here's what happened in 2017. It's here for about a year, and most of us remember that, where we had 1.5 million acres burned. But the effects on the beef cattle industry, on agriculture as a whole, is huge when these things happen. And I think it's just stuff that we have to be prepared for. Here's what it is now. Doesn't look too bad. In fact, there are certain areas of the country are complaining about too much precip, but it's interesting to me that what's happened in the last decade was every bit as bad as what happened in the 1930s. Some people ask, well, how does a rancher then manage, how do we deal with climate change? And the simple answer is we manage forages for ecological function. We try to graze them and manage them so that those plants and those vegetation communities optimize ecological processes. One of them is water optimization. You know, one of the things we're looking at with our research is how much vegetation do we have to leave on site for the safe capture, storage, and release of water? How do we optimize water? And along with that, how do we manage soils and nutrient retention of those soils? One of the big things we're seeing in range beef cattle research is how do we increase soil organic matter? Because when we do that, then we increase water holding capacity and in turn improve production. And we can do that during drought years. And if we do that, we have plant communities that are more resilient and management schemes that are more resilient. We're also looking more and more at how to manage disturbance to optimize plant communities and all these properties up here. And disturbance is one of those weird words. Everyone goes, well, that means fire. It also means grazing. Grazing is a disturbance. Whenever they eat a plant, it disturbs that plant. And so how do we manage that in a way that gives us the very best plant communities and most resilient vegetation communities? And then finally, how do we optimize energy cycles? How do we convert solar energy, carbon dioxide into plant growth? And we're working on that. I'm really not worried about proving that ranching can be a carbon sink. I know it can be. I've seen it. And so those are the kinds of things we're looking at. It's been really interesting for me. In November, I'll be 3 years here in Montana, and I saw one of the worst droughts in history and one of the 2 worst winters in history. So I've seen it all in 3 years. So the winter of 2017, 2018, and 2018, 2019 were phenomenal winters. This is actually a picture taken up at the High Line not too far from Havre in 2018, in about February. It was pretty grim. We're doing winter grazing research up there. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for our ranchers. It's a challenge in a lot of different ways. One of the things that we're doing with our research is the last National Academy of Sciences publication on the effect of environment on nutrient requirements was printed in 1981. Okay, I was just finishing high school. Okay, so that's quite a while ago. The models are outdated. They don't serve us well. So a lot of what we're doing with our research is how do we revisit this? How do we give our ranchers better information about how to deal with environmental extremes? Most of the models are focused on energy, and if you're interested in that, we can talk about that more later. But it has no mention of protein, mineral, or vitamin needs, and we know those things are impacted by environment. It's also, these models only relate to temperature and hair coat. And I remember getting a phone call last February from a person just outside of Glasgow, and it was 34 below that day with 30 mile an hour sustained winds with the wind chill around minus 57 below. And he asked me, so what do I need to feed my cows? And it went off the charts. We had no models that even showed that. I didn't know what to tell them other than I hope they're in good condition and I hope it warms up real soon, because we just don't have the information. It's limited in terms of precept, wind conditions, and all those things. You know, this is where we're at. This is where we're at last weekend with our cattle. It's a challenge. It stresses these animals, something we have to worry about. Makes you appreciate having a barn where you can get young calves and things like that where it's dry. And I think I'll just kind of roll through this. One of the things that we've struggled with in the last 2 years in Montana beef industry is what we refer to as weak calf syndrome. And that's just calves when they're born, you know, lack the ability to have vigor and stand and nurse from their cows. And I've been asked to give a number of talks on this. And when I first got asked, I thought, well, you know, I know the term. And so I'll just do a Google Scholar search, and I got 79,000 hits. It's like, oh, man, I don't have time to summarize all that. But what I found is weak calves are a function of improper nutrition, but also more often than not an interaction of nutrition and environment. And when we have these cold, extended cold periods, those cows are gestating a calf, and then when the calf's born, typically they end up weak, and a number of other things end up with that. But things that I think from a research standpoint the university needs to address. So with that, you know, like I said, what I do, what my research team does is beef production systems research, and really we're all about optimizing ranch and rangeland forage use. And rather than finding the most productive cow we can find, we're looking to find the cow that fits Montana environments, which is a different approach to these sorts of things. So with that, I'll turn it over to, who's next?
So which one advances? So good afternoon. I'm Bruce Maxwell, and I was co-director of the Montana Institute on Ecosystems, as well as a professor in the Land Resources and Environmental Science Department here at MSU. A lot of my research is focused on precision agriculture. I'm not going to talk much about that today, but I'm going to talk more about the experience I had with, as the lead author of the agricultural chapter of the Montana Climate Assessment that was published in 2017. And this is an update from that, certainly, but extends from that in that I think that there's some really thought-provoking things that are coming up in our world, in the literature on what's going on with climate change and what we might expect in the near future. So, and so some of this is a global perspective, and what I'm trying to do is create a place where we can have a good discussion about how these global effects are really apt to affect a place like Montana and certainly our agricultural industry. So, well, let me say that how are crop and livestock producers responding to climate change is the charge that was given us. So I'm going to say what I heard when we did the rollout of the climate assessment, traveled around the state to a lot of different meetings, talked to about 4,000 people is our estimate, the kinds of reactions that I was getting. And I think that it's worth sharing those with you. So from crop producers, I was hearing, yes, I see patterns in the weather are changing. People are out there every day. They're seeing things different than what they've seen in the past. That was an indication that, yeah, okay. We have always managed around variable weather. That's what people say. That makes sense. It's nothing news to us. It's always been changing, and we manage around change. That's what it amounts to. It's kind of like what Tester said. It's familiar ground to us. And what we see is when people say, when we say, so how are you responding to this change? They were saying, well, we're doing no-till agriculture. We're doing, or at least reducing it. We want to retain soil moisture, and that'll help retain greenhouse gas emissions because we're not going to drive through the field as much. All makes sense, and those are all good strategies. Crop diversification to add soil organic matter, and resilience to price variability. Important. These are the things that really seem to come together and create a lot of this uncertainty, and so this makes sense. The soil organic matter increase is something that's always talked about, and the assumption is that means that our soils will hold more water. And so what you start to hear is an underlying theme to how you adjust your management, perhaps, is all about adjusting to drought. And you showed that a nice example of drought is what, in the West, is certainly part of what we live with and what has been that major factor that we adjust our management to. So the interesting part I found about that is that how does climate really drive that drought, and is that recognized as that integral relationship, and could droughts be somewhat different? I think 2017 was a great example of how drought could be really different, especially in Montana, because we had a rapid onset of drought. I don't know if you remember, but 2017, we had a pretty wet spring, and then suddenly, the last week of June, it got hot, and it went over 90 degrees for 22 days straight, and no rain, and that dried out our soil profile incredibly fast. How that occurred or what exactly was involved there, we're not absolutely sure. But that was a very different kind of drought, one unanticipated. I feel like as scientists, we were caught with our pants down. We didn't predict what would happen there, and yet this is something that now we know something about. The only other time we had a flash drought was in 1910, where we had the same sort of conditions. So it had happened before, but not since then had we had that rapid of a dry down. part of this, I can't help but believe, is the fact that you get a wet spring, you produce a lot of leaf area. We had the same thing happen this year, but it kept raining. So we kind of got away with it. Excuse me, but when that rapid dry down is all that leaf area, you put that out there, that is just a siphon to the atmosphere. And so if it does get dry, it's going to pull all that moisture out of the soil. So that's one possible explanation for that. But the point is, it's kind of a different kind of drought. The next response is, well, we need to add irrigation. Well, that sounds like a good idea if water is unlimited. And the problem is, if we're pulling water out of our streams flows are getting lower than they've ever been in the last few years. And when I say stream, I'm talking about every drainage in the state, really, is declining way below averages. And that's because of a whole set of things. But number one is we're warming up in the spring, so our snowpack melts quicker. We get rain on that snowpack, and it just comes out all at once. And we don't get a chance to release that in a slow way. So that water leaves the state, and we don't get to pull on it. And so irrigation may not be a sustainable answer. And our aquifers are drying down as well. We're seeing that in our groundwater measurements. So these are all things that are going to be important. We see farmers responding by saying, well, we're going to grow winter wheat instead of spring wheat. Well, major thing driving that is we're not getting good grain fill in a lot of the spring wheat growing areas anymore. And that's this heating. When you get days above 90, right at that time when you're getting fertilization of those flowers, you don't get good grain fill. So that's a wise move. And it's also a wise move because of the weather patterns that we've seen change. And that is with more spring and fall precipitation, that spring precipitation is keeping people out of the field. And they're not planting spring grains or spring crops until late. And then you run into the risk of, if they're still growing, like this last week, really hard to harvest under those conditions, and will you even get a harvest? So these are issues that really we're seeing changes in some of these patterns. We're seeing farmers respond, and it makes sense that they're using a lot of logic there. But in the same way, we probably got to be thinking even more broadly about how we respond to some of these things. When we talked to livestock producers, they said the same thing. Yes, I see the patterns changing. I'd like to know more about how that affects my particular place. I'd like to know a lot better, get better predictions of what those weather conditions are going to be. That all makes sense. But again, we've always managed around weather being variable. It's not a new thing to us. That's life for a rancher. We're dealing with lack of water or potential in drought. Again, create stock ponds and put them in every gully. And we've seen a lot of that around the state. Certainly that's, stock growers have been doing that. Will they hold water long enough and get through those really dry periods like we had in 2017? That was a real challenge. Some of them dried up, and it was difficult, I think, moving animals around, especially in the heat. Add irrigation for hay production. Hay is an integral part of livestock production, certainly in Montana, and so again, irrigation could be challenged, and there could be some real issues. We've seen some interesting patterns in hay production, just taking from the same county the difference between irrigated hay production and dryland production of hay, and that difference is changing. And what we're seeing is that with the same amount of water, you're not producing the same amount of hay. And this is a disturbing set of patterns that we're not sure what's driving that exactly. But if it takes more and more water, when water is challenged, we're going to have issues with that. So what could crop producers do to be more resilient to these kinds of climate changes that we're starting to see? So I've listed some things to be more thought and discussion provoking than anything. But I think we need to increase certainty with contracts to grow crops. That really helps. You know, it's this compounding uncertainty of price along with the climatic kinds of changes that has really exacerbated the problem of making decisions in agriculture. So I think that's a real issue. So any ways we can get around that will be important. Manage for sudden onset of drought with earlier spring and fall planting. I already talked about that. Realize that irrigation cannot continue to be expanded, and therefore, what are the options? What are the crop options out there that might withstand those kinds of droughts? How do we plant in a way that makes some sense? Planting earlier certainly helps with that, but thinking through those kinds of situations about how do we get past some of these. Plant multi-species cover crops that livestock can be finished on. The multi-species cover crop, first of all, something's going to survive and something's going to do well. You put 12, 13 species out there, something's going to do okay. So that's a pretty good strategy. We're seeing some luck with that. The other idea is integrating that with livestock. And the livestock really like some of those crops, and I think it's a real opportunity to start to think of how do we finish our animals here. And that's where I think that's an important aspect that we ought to think about, and that really comes from sort of a global perspective. You know, meat consumption per capita is going up around the world. In places like China, it's going up exponentially. In India, it's going up linearly. Who would have thought India is going to eat more meat or is eating more meat? Africa, there's 3 or 4 countries that their meat consumption is going up exponentially. We can't continue to produce meat and feed 10 billion people. That can't be our source of protein entirely. That might not sound like good news, hard thing to say in a room like this, but here's the deal. I think this might be an opportunity for Montana because we're not going to stop eating meat. I think there's a lot of this country in a place like Montana is where meat production is going to end up. What we can't do is use those fertile soils in the Midwest to grow feed for the cows to be finished on. We're going to have to figure out a way to be producing protein more directly on those landscapes. So meat production is going to be pushed into places like Montana. And if it is, how do we take advantage of that? How do we figure out a way to finish our animals here, process them here, and take advantage of those kinds of things? I'm getting already on to the next slide. So in terms of crop production, minimizing nitrogen fertilizer use, weed and pest control using, precision agriculture are all important aspects of ways to start to really be efficient with our production. Use decision aids that optimize field-specific input based on monitoring data and in-field experiments, I think is crucial. That's where my research area, I'm biased, that's my research area, so of course I push that idea, but I think it's one of the most effective ways for really becoming efficient with our management. With the livestock side, experiment with more heat-tolerant breeds, and you've already talked about this stuff. Strategic placement of water and how we try to think about the efficiency of livestock production. We got the expert here. He can talk more about that than I can. Planting trees. Trees are the place to capture carbon. We ought to be thinking about growing more trees. How do we do that? Where do we do that? You know, we used to plant windbreaks. We should be thinking about that, but trees also could serve in a livestock production because it can give us shade. And animals can't withstand as much heat as we're starting to put them through in our summers. Finish livestock on grass and push for local processing. Market products based on quality and production methods. I think we could do a lot there in terms of how we market our animals here. Use data-intensive monitoring to increase livestock production efficiency. So I'll stop with that. This is the climate assessment, and you can go to that and see some of the assessment of where we have been and what some of the projections are for our climate. You know, we're looking at increasing temperatures are projected, and it's been really consistent with what we've actually seen. And so I don't think we're going to get out from under that one. Precipitation is more variable, harder to predict. We're looking at increased precipitation is sort of the bottom line, and to tell you the truth, that's warmer air holds more water. So If we're lucky and you're in the right place, maybe you'll get the precipitation. I hope it's in the right time of the year. Okay, I'll stop there.
All right, so I'm Dominique Woodham. I work for Montana State University Extension here in Gallatin County. I'm the Natural Resources Extension Educator. And I'm also a Montana Farm Bureau member in my home county of Sweetgrass County. I live in Big Timber. I'm not a researcher or a scientist, and what the best definition of what I do is I'm a connector of resources. I try to connect folks who work in the field or in the woods with practical tools and information that are science and research based so that they can make a well-informed management decision to better their operation. Most often when people are contacting me, it's to talk about one of two things: wildfire or honeybees. Both topics are a great cart to communicate about weather and climate. And by communicating and teaching people how to reduce their wildfire risk or to prepare for wildfire, they're learning adaptation tools that will help improve their resiliency when impacted by wildfires, and in a broader sense, climate variability. From experience, I know that things rarely go as planned, but planning and preparation are indispensable. Planning helps us to be intentional with our decisions and our actions, and to remain calm amidst chaos and uncertainty. Resilient when we're encountering deviations from predictions, and reduce risks from climate variability. In a world where climate variability adds complexity to our decision making, producers can be prepared through adaptation planning. This helps with replacing emotional and reactive responses with thoughtful and controlled actions, empowering farmers and ranchers to take control of the uncertainty. Looking out at this crowd and the people sitting next to me, I see experts. All of you are experts. The people next to me are experts in their specialty research. They're not experts in your agricultural business. In your land potential or in your available resources, we're not the experts, you are. You are that expert. How you choose to prepare for extreme weather events and to adapt to a variable climate, that's up to you, and that will be unique to you and your operation, your goals, your crop, your available resources, and your location. A customized response is required. You have the expertise to address your unique challenges. There are resources and tools out there to help you streamline your thoughts, and the best place to start is starting small. Talk to your peers. You can learn so much from somebody else's lessons learned. What worked, what didn't work? What would they have done differently? Start forming a plan. Even if you never end up using that plan, you are creating that contingency plan in your mind. You have those ideas and the many potential scenarios you've already ran through many, many times. You will feel better prepared and you will feel more in control. No one can make the decisions for you. If you have a plan, be flexible. Decision making and action implementation are within your control. There is no reason why climate variability should break you. Yes, research out there says there will be extremes and we need to deal with it. There will be unprecedented uncertainty, and the complexity of living and working in the natural world and within agriculture, it will increase. But what I am confident of is agriculture is filled with creative and innovative minds and optimistic people, and we are all resilient. Not only will Montana agriculture be prepared to adapt to a variable climate, but together we will help to support mitigation work as well. Natural resources and agriculture will be part of the solution. And what I have to share is that there are tools out there that they're being improved every day. We definitely don't have all the answers. And one of the things I wanted to share on that came from the USDA and with work with the Northern Plains Climate Hubs and the Northeastern Climate Hubs is adaptation resources for agriculture, responding to climate variability and change in the Midwest and the Northeast. We're hoping to have one that's specific to the Western states coming out within the next few years. But it's a great toolbook. It's a workbook to help you address your operation, your concerns. And I've got copies you all can take home. And I look forward to talking with all of you more.
So kind of up to you if you have questions for one another, or we can throw it to the audience for further Q&A.
Why don't we throw it to the audience first?
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
I'm Jeff Stensky. Hello, I'm Jeff Stensky from the National Center of Appropriate Technology. We also run the ATRA National Sustainable Ag Program, a good resource for farmers. For over 27 years, based in Butte. Can you believe it? Anyway, I noticed in all of your talks, no discussion of public policy. I've been spending 14 years working on crop insurance. And I think crop insurance may be important in this climate variability. And for you, I would say, what about the fodder insurance? Has that been working for people? Is that helpful? And for you, Bruce, and others, there's kind of a double-edged sword with crop insurance. One, it's so good in this country, so well subsidized, that people want to use it for their specific crop. And it sometimes gets in the way of diversifying. Because it's so good, why would you grow something else when you can get great crop insurance on that specific crop? So for 14 years, I've been working on a project called Whole Farm Revenue, which is now available in every county in the United States, through a lot of work of a lot of people over 14 years. And it incentivizes mixed systems, livestock. It gives insurance to people that both produce livestock and crops. And it protects the revenue of the whole farm rather than any specific crop. It's a great idea. It has a lot of problems that I could spend hours talking about. But do you see, what kind of public policy do any of you see that would help in terms of, let's just say insurance for one, in terms of trying to get to a future that could be more resilient?
You do crops and I'll do the livestock.
Is this on? Yeah. Boy, that's a hard one to answer. I'm not an expert certainly on crop insurance, but it does seem to me that it's slow to adjust as we introduce more crops, and so it's probably worked in a negative way towards diversification. But now we're seeing it catch up. It sort of goes through ebbs and flows, and I think that now we're seeing more insurance on more varied crops. And you're right, I think we're seeing more insurance being taken out on crops. Insuring the whole farm, that's an interesting idea. I don't know anything about that, and I'd like to see your comparison on that. So I'm afraid I don't have much answer to that. So, other than to verify what you stated.
Yeah. I'm probably not a good one to speak to crop insurance, but I actually can talk a little bit about the 4-H insurance. Turns out that actually here at Montana State, Dr. Velasco, and believe it or not, my daughter, who's doing a master's in ag ed, is looking at the pasture 4-H insurance program. The reality is those programs haven't been used much by the livestock industry. They probably should be used more, but they just haven't. That might be just the nature of beef cattle producers that tend to not necessarily participate in those kind of programs. But yeah, it's an interesting program and one that we need to look at down the road. It's actually, by the way, just based on 1 month's preset. And you select what that month would be, and I think it can actually be quite lucrative for beef cattle people, but they need to look into it more.
No comment. I don't have a comment. My name is Dan Bates. I actually have a comment about public policy. I'm an agronomist, crop consultant in Great Falls. I consult on right now about 35,000 acres with Hooterites through small farmers. I've got one guy that's got 400 acres and one guy that's got 20,000 acres. And so I cover a wide range. All the crops, including hemp, I work with. And my one comment on public policy as a driver in our industry is I get very worried about that. Because I see a lot of policies coming out of the NRCS and that are driven out of North Dakota, that are driven out of Minnesota, that are driven out of New York. And guys, they get twice the rain we do, 3 times the rain we do. Their growing season is, 90 days longer than ours. When you're told you have to plant a cover crop in the fall in Great Falls to get this grant from the government, a cover crop in the fall in Great Falls is pretty worthless. Because you think about how tall our winter wheat gets. It only gets this tall. Well, back in New York, they're getting ryegrass that's 3 feet tall, that then they're plowing down in the spring and planting. I don't think we would ever get that here. Maybe as the climate variability changes, we might see that. But, so I worry about public policy being generated outside our area and about us not participating in that. That we need to be very on top of who's making those decisions and what that policy is. Because I've lived in 5 states, guys. I've worked in Idaho, Oregon, Montana, Arizona, and Washington State. And I will tell you, the area I live in now, Great Falls area, has a very unique climate. It's one of the most challenging areas I've ever worked in to manage farms from the Rocky Mountain front out past Havre. The variation in climate in that range is huge. I got one place that's getting 13 inches of rain, I got one place that's getting 6. So I just want to put that out there. Not that I disagree with you, public policy has its place, but I get very nervous that we end up leaving that to other people in other states that have no clue what's our reality.
Butch Gillespie, we ranch up on the High Line, and then I did take on an extra gig and got elected to the state senate last year. So another new adventure, talking about change and one thing and another. But I guess it seems like with change, there's always the delayed factor, and I'm just wondering whether either one of the professors would have anything that to clue us in on is, what would you really like to see farmers and ranchers be doing that they're probably not doing? You sit back and you wring your hands and you say, they're missing out on a great opportunity here. So I might just challenge any of the 3 actually on that. And then I'll add one little excerpt to the fellow from Great Falls there. It seems like, especially in northern Montana, we have so much influence from Alberta, just because we're just right south of it, but even Saskatchewan. But it just seems like they are a lot further ahead of us on a whole lot of things. I hate to say that, but it's kind of the way it works. But there is stuff to be learned from them. I think sometimes I say, actually, you guys up there learn it from the Midwest and then adapt to it and then send it down to us. But it doesn't matter to me as long as we get the information, I guess, and the opportunity to benefit. But with that, I'll get back to the question.
Well, I had in my slide there some of the things that I think farmers could do, and I think that the technology that we have now, and more importantly, the data that we have that's freely available on the internet about everything, what we're seeing with satellites, and now there are 20-some new sensors on the International Space Station, all really have a focus on agricultural kinds of sensing from space. And the fact is that the progression is almost daily in terms of improvement of utilizing those kinds of measurements. So when I say I'd like to see you use that more, it's not, that actually is not your problem. It's our problem as researchers to create the tools so you can access those and utilize those to make better decisions. So I hope as we produce those tools, you'll start to use them. So I'm as much talking to you to ask for those tools as I am saying that the researchers need to produce those tools. And as I said, I think that represents a huge opportunity, and I think it will improve the efficiency of our agriculture in a big way. I'm certainly seeing with using the information that we have available to us right now, and some of our analysis of that kind of data is showing us that we can improve efficiency tremendously on farms by simply being more site-specific with our management. So, you know, we're seeing, we have experiments that are being automatically put out with variable rate applicators for nitrogen fertilizer management, for example. And we're seeing a huge advantage, and the economic returns are increased significantly by being able to site-specifically manage that particular input. And that's on every field that we've really looked at and measured this on. So that technology, which is rapidly becoming kind of commonplace on the farm, and certainly in all the equipment, can really improve our abilities. So that's an area that if you have that technology and you're not using it, you ought to learn how to use it or come up with the ways to do that, and certainly pressure us scientists and the Ag Experiment Station to produce those kinds of tools.
Bruce, I think looking at the livestock industry, I'd probably echo what's been said about crops. You know, I think when you look at 4th and 5th generation ranches, they're probably better at managing their resources than we certainly could be. You know, the years of experience is worth years of education, in my opinion. But in terms of what we need to do in the future to get better at what we do, you know, one of them I think is you know, this Bruce just mentioned is let's get more scientific about how we approach this. Most of the train wrecks I've seen with beef cattle producers in the last 2 years were people that weren't totally prepared for these hard winters, which meant they didn't go into the winter of cows in as good a condition as they needed to be. And so when we went into that huge negative energy balance because of cold stress, they just weren't prepared for it. And so, you know, how do we prepare for these things? I always tell people having cows a bit fleshier going in the fall is like having hay in the barn. And but some of the things we have to learn to use is understand how the environment affects vegetation. And I think our ranching industry needs to understand more that their cows really are harvesters of vegetation that's very dynamic and very much impacted by the environment. How to understand that, how to become more precise in how we provide supplemental inputs, and then how do we optimize the use of the cellulose to make it into a food product is really what was.
Yeah. I want to add to that in that when I'm talking about these tools, I think that and certainly the perspective that we're using in my research is one that very much honors the local knowledge. And I think Tim and Domo mentioned that you're the best person to manage your land. You've got that long history. You understand that piece of property better than anybody. So when we develop a tool, it's got to be one that you interact with, one that you see as a decision aid, not a decision maker, a way that helps you give you more information when you're making a decision. And I think that's real crucial in terms of the thinking of what these tools are and what they can be. So that's a very good point. I'm glad you pointed that out.
And I'd like to echo what Tim and Bruce mentioned. A lot of the research, you know, that's coming out, it's broad area. We can try to be site specific, but when we're talking site specific, it's obviously not specific to each individual operation across a county. It's more site specific, say per county, per region. And you have that specialized knowledge. A lot of times our tools that we're coming up with, they're kind of broad landscape and scale, you know, and it's going to be general type recommendations that we feel comfortable making, you know, maintain or restore a natural ecosystem, promote biological diversity, enhance landscape connectivity. We're not probably going to go more specific than that, because what will happen is in the off chance, you know, one of us makes a recommendation, somebody's going to go try it, and if it doesn't work out for them, they're going to say, well, I was told, and it was awful and it didn't work out. They don't know what's going on. We're really trying to help people out by providing you information, but you have to engage, you have to interact. And that's one of the great things about, you know, a tool. When we talk a tool, this is really basic. This is actually a printed out workbook. You can go through, you know your operation, whether you're cattle, grain, bison, hogs, anything, you know, you can implement that, work your way through it, ask yourself these questions, because all of your resources that you will have access to will be different for every operation. I can just give like a personal example. My background, I worked in wildfire management for 12 years. In the winters, my husband worked on different ranches across Montana, so we were on different cattle ranches and bison ranches. And now we own a farm in southwestern Washington. All of those ranches were different. All of them had very different inputs. Same with our farm in Washington. The way we're doing things, maybe it's the way things were done back when the farm was originally homesteaded in 1892. But it's going to be slightly different because we have more tools within our power and access that we can implement and make better decisions going forward.
Hi, my name is Maggie Gordon. I work with Northern Plains Resource Council. And we have been doing a lot of on-the-ground workshops to talk to producers about different adaptive management and things they can do. And one of the biggest challenges or conversations we often have is connecting them to the science and making it make sense. And also just being able to use science in some way with monitoring what they're doing if the changes they're trying are making a difference. So I'm curious what opportunities you guys see to make that connection with producers. Or thousands of them on the ground. How do we make those connections between producers and the science that's going to help them make decisions?
Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, it's a really good question, and we're basically public servants, so I'd encourage you to invite us. Also, Montana State University Extension is outstanding as well. But I would also point out other programs. NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, has a number of like joint stewardship programs and things that you can get producers to work with. Part of that's monitoring and just understanding, impacts of what they're doing from day to day. And those programs, soil water conservation districts, you can go on and on and on. In terms of there's help out there, but how do we engage them and how do we get producers to work with them? But then also, how do we, one of the problems I see with agriculture is we tend to work in the moment rather than project out. Well, what do I want to see 5 years from now? If I have this range area that I would like to see improved, in what way do I want to see it improved, and how do I document, are we moving this in the right direction? And so those are the kinds of things that I think are most useful, and I don't know of any land manager that's not interested in those kinds of things, but how do we get to start talking the same language? And that probably made no sense at all.
No, I think that it's very challenging to figure out how to take a lot of the technology and monitoring capabilities that we have now and make them available in a useful way. And that's where I was saying, it's decision support in some fashion. And it can span different kinds of things. Certainly as Donald points out, you can have a nice workbook that gives you some general ideas. I see that as a toolbox, but it doesn't help you much choose the tool. And what people would really like is come on, give me more information. And I think one of the things is that one thing we've always done in agricultural research, or for a long time, the whole land grant system was dedicated to making very deterministic kinds of recommendations. And that led us down a path, which was successful, by the way. We increased our production, continue to increase our production, with that very input-based approach, because the inputs were helping squash a lot of the variation that we would naturally get from year to year, et cetera. We're trying to back off on those things now. And as we back off on those, we have greater uncertainty in what those outcomes will be. I think part of that is changing our message into more of a probabilistic message. In other words, what I like to say is, I'm really trying to make you a better gambler. And so I can give you your odds on getting a response. So you know, and tell you the truth, we were always wrapped in this idea of significant effects from a statistical point of view, where we were 95% confident. Heck, any farmer rancher will tell you that if you can just tell me 50% of the time what I might get, I take it. And the fact is so that's the way we should be delivering information now, because yeah, we understand uncertainty, we can characterize that uncertainty, and I think we need to make our recommendations that way. That will help in that process of trying to deliver information that we were really reluctant to, and in many cases we would just end up giving you the toolbox without really giving any specifics with it. So I think we're moving in those directions, and that's going to help. Probably still not the total answer. What do? Do you put it on a website? Do you go out and talk about it? You know, get as many extension agents talking about it? All those things will be important. There's no question about that. One thing that we heard repeatedly when we asked about what are the utility, or what kinds of tools are going to be most important, when we were talking about the climate assessment, everybody said, I want to get it on my phone. And that's what we need to do. So there's our challenge, is trying to get these tools on that phone so it's that handy.
And to try to be a little more helpful from my perspective, like Bruce was saying, we've got the toolbox, but we can try to help you figure out the tools in it. And so, like, for example, I work in extension. That's what I get bombarded with every day, is I get phone calls and emails, people asking me to help them solve their problems. And it's not necessarily they want me to help them solve their problem, they actually want me to solve their problem, which I'm not going to do for every single person that sends me an email or gives me a phone call, but I'll certainly give them the toolbox. And if I can get through all those emails and phone calls and all those site visits that I do every week, I can go out to their property and I can walk around with them, tell them what I see or what I'm looking at. And if I can't do that, or if I don't have that expertise that they're looking for information in, I refer them to Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Conservation District, the Farm Service Agency, or even sometimes specialists on campus. We have extension every county and reservation across Montana, and we've got that network built in where we can help connect you with that person who can really help you solve your problem.
I think just to add one more point is, what I found, and maybe as I get older, life seems simpler to me, although I know less, just so you know. But what I found is when we get everyone on the same language, and we all have very similar values of what we want. No one wants unhealthy ecosystems. No one wants invasive plants or systems that are falling apart. So when we start talking about like ecological function, how do we optimize natural resource production and diversity? Everyone's for that, and so you sort of change. You make sure everyone's speaking the same language. You bring them together. You know what? Site visits are the best things you can do, and where you don't answer with specifics, but you talk about generalities and how do we want to move this system to something that's better, for wildlife or for livestock production, for both, preferably. Those are the best results.
It also, just to jump in there, it also depends on what your end goal is and what it is you're actually seeking specifically, because that will impact what recommendations are. Again, going back to a personal example, our farm is identical to my husband's uncle's farm, which is 3 miles away from ours. Exact same soil type, exact same ground, flat, all riverside. Very different what we each want to do. We went through the organic certification process. We decided to go organic. He's choosing not to do that. They just rented a no-till drill from their local conservation district and are experimenting with a new pasture mix. You know, you can have, it depends on your end goal, what it is you're wanting to get out of the visit, the process, the end goal.
I'll open my mouth again on this comment too. Don't forget the private sector. All right, I'm an independent agronomist. I don't sell fertilizer, I don't sell chemical, I don't sell anything but knowledge. All right, I'm always reading, let's start reading your stuff. I'm always reading Bruce's stuff. I'm always online. I'm always following ATRA and those types of things. So don't forget to engage with individuals like me. The certified cropping, the CCA, there's a test that you have to take to be certified as cropping advisors. That's a whole slug of people that you can engage with that are out meeting individually with farmers. Like I said, I'm on 35,000 acres right now that I meet individually almost weekly during the growing season with the grower. So you want to get your message out, I'm talking to them every week. That's a good way to get a message out. Also, remember that the language is important. I work with some growers that would not talk to people in this room because they feel attacked personally every time they run into some people. They're online, they're seeing attacks on farming, and they feel that way. And I spend a lot of time, half my job as an agronomist is being a psychologist. Is talking to them and saying, look, there's good stuff coming out of here you gotta be looking for. So I just want to throw that out. Don't forget that the private sector is out there. You've got co-ops all over the state. They all have agronomists. Most of the co-ops have, each office has 2 to 3 agronomists working there. Some are certified, some aren't. There's I think in Great Falls, I know about 6 independent agronomists working out of Great Falls. And I know there's more scattered around the area. And we have the same goal. You know, we're working for the farmer. We want them to be successful. And we know that they aren't going to be successful if their environment dies.
What I'll say is I think it would be awesome if you all had a discussion panel where you shared your stories. I was involved in the discussion panel at the Wyoming Stock Growers last winter where we brought in ranchers from north central Wyoming, western Wyoming, U.S. Forest Service, and NRCS, and they all sat on a panel together and they talked about their wildfire stories, and everybody learned so much from everyone's individual experiences. And that was the best part, is everyone in the audience could relate to someone on the discussion panel, whether it was their neighbor or someone they knew through work. And I think a discussion panel with a bunch of agronomists sharing what you guys are seeing and what people are asking you about would be awesome.
So this question goes along the lines of his, and I'm curious about like public-private strategic partnerships, because just due to the nature of the university system, you have all this. You're at the cutting edge, the front lines of the technology, but because of the nature of the university, there's a lot of latency in terms of getting that data out to the public. Just like the bureaucracy and everything that goes along with it. So. And you guys are in the business of marketing that research, right? You don't have a marketing department to get it out to the general public. So I'm curious what the public-private strategic relationships, or if you have any, or if you're developing any, look like, or if you plan on doing that in the future.
Well, I can give you firsthand, we're dealing right now with developing some of the algorithms and analysis approaches that we're developing. We don't want to build our own software. There is, in the cropping world, there's hundreds now of different softwares being developed for farmers to use to interact with their yield monitor data, their input data, all these kinds of things. And it's really hard to sort out for us. I can't imagine being a dealer or being a producer and thinking about that. One of the reasons we're trying to examine it is figure out, can we just somehow come up with an agreement to put our algorithms in somebody else's software? But we don't want you to have to pay for it. The university would like us to have somebody pay us for it. But we're trying to figure out, how can we have the producers own it? So that they somehow buy into the use of it through maybe a cooperative or something like that. These are really complicated issues, and it's become a very difficult world to work in, to tell you the truth, because figuring out these interactions with that part of the private sector has been complex. So this is a place where we have things ready to go, and we can't get them out there fast enough. And so much of it is, can we find the right software dealers? We are finally narrowing in on that and finding some possibilities that of folks that won't be charging for the use of their software, but are willing to put our tool into their front-end software. So it's getting there, but it's not. It hasn't been easy to find that. So it takes a lot of time. I know that.
Actually, thank you for the question. I think particularly land-grant universities, but public universities as a whole are struggling. And I think the future of these universities is developing greater and more public-private partnerships. Montana State, I can tell you, embraces that model. Kurt Kangas sitting back there. Kurt, raise your hand. Kurt's regional representative for the American Angus Association. Our department's developing a partnership with them, and that they're donating a registered Angus herd eventually. It's over time. That will then in turn do research on that will then be used by our seed stock industry, to become more efficient in what they do. There's other conversations about these public-private partnerships, but my position is a public-private partnership. It's endowed by about 4 different entities, mostly the beef cattle industry in Montana, with expectations that I do work that's impactful for the state. And so all those things are examples of this. And I think down the road, if you want land-grant university that's going to serve your state better, then we're all obligated to look into those kinds of opportunities.
Does the panel have any questions for the audience?
Are you gonna let us get to the door?
We can.
Does that give you 3 steps?
I'd like to return to the public policy question for a moment, and ask the panel to reflect, if you could, for a second, about whether there are other places other than the federal level, particularly, where there might be, or where there should be policy discussions going on. Should this be happening in other ways? Does it need to be pushed down to the local level and be made more collaborative? If there are policy tools, what are they, and where should they be developed?
Well, I think clearly they should be developed probably at all levels of policy, from counties to legislatures to Congress. I had the opportunity to spend a day in Washington last spring, where I went to a number of a range of offices with the other scientists talking about funding for agriculture and specifics in the Farm Bill about policies that associate with that, what kinds of developments are occurring, and was had a very good reception from everybody across the board on the idea that we really need to move in directions of how are we going to cope with a lot of the climate change aspect, but also just this issue of uncertainty is grown to such a level that we can't just solve it with insurance. We can't just solve it with a piece of technology. Increasing efficiency will help, but we really need better information and ideas about looking to the future. At the state level, I think I put one statement out there of what we could do. I don't think we move in the direction of marketing like we could. I think that policies that will influence marketing and increase the marketing that we do locally makes a lot of sense. Montana has a lot of cachet in the world. We're looked at as a place to produce pristine goods. And it doesn't matter what we're producing, we should capitalize on that in a big way. So whatever policies take advantage of those kinds of things make a lot of sense to me. And with our increased ability to follow products from production to table are crucial. So we ought to be thinking about that as a state. When it gets to the county scale, I think that, you know, there are counties now that are using their funds, or whatever funds they can get at, to put weather stations out in their counties. That's real crucial. Montana does not have a very good weather station network. We're improving that a lot. The Montana Mesonet out of the Climate Office is doing a lot to put stations out and get a much better monitoring system in place. So that may not be policy specific, but it is actually, in a way, that level of government is taking advantage of whatever way they can to get those partnerships developed with federal agencies, state agencies, et cetera, to do that. So water monitoring, another crucial place where we don't have the detail that we really need in terms of our monitoring capabilities. Only our larger streams tend to have those capabilities. We need to be monitoring in a much more complete way. So that gets down to more of these local kinds of decisions, although often federal and state agencies are involved with that as well.
Yeah, I think to try to answer that question, it's a hard question. I'll go back to my previous life. I spent 25 years with Oregon State University, 23 managing a range livestock research station. Our reason for being, quite frankly, was threatened endangered species. That's what kept us in business. And I observed over that time period where we dealt with policy poorly and where we dealt with policy well. And it kind of all started with spotted owls. And that was out of my area of expertise, but generally that sort of ran over the top of the timber industry before they had an ample time to respond. And it had profound effects on public land management, but also private land as well. Then we, in the mid-90s, we started dealing with threatened endangered fish species, and that was an interesting process. We got better of dealing with that, but initially they tried to, at both the federal level and the state level, to ban livestock grazing on any stream that didn't meet the 303D criteria, which, by the way, was 80% of the streams in the state of Oregon. I got funded for a lot of research with cattle and riparian grazing, which might be a good thing. I'm not sure if it's totally necessary, but we had to do it because that was the needs. More recently, I think we've gotten better on how we did it, and I think initially we became confrontational. We tend to look at these things as agriculture against the world or agriculture against the environmentalists. The best example of where we dealt with policy in a very effective, constructive way is sage-grouse. That was a species that was going to be listed a few years ago. Grassroots efforts, universities, county stock grower groups, regional BLM, Forest Service, both private land and public lands, all developed partnerships where they developed regional grassroots plans from the ground up, where they didn't try to manage a single species. Instead, they tried to manage the habitat that those species lived in. And they forgot about the species. How do we get the habitat as pristine and as functioning as possible? And I think that's the reason why that species was not listed. But a whole different approach. Let's start with the landowners, the land managers, both private and public. Let's partner and let's talk the same language and what's best for, in many cases, what's best for the livestock producers, also best for wildlife, best for water and things like that. And that was successful. So I think we're getting better at it. I think one of the things we have to do is is, take the gloves off and not want to fight. Instead go, okay, how do we solve these things? And so, but that's probably my best example of policy.
My perspective is absolutely from the wildfire perspective. I've seen in various areas across the western United States, how do you deal with wildfire? How do you deal with wildfire preparedness? What should we be doing? And one response is insurance. Some insurance companies will offer a price break if their insured are doing wildfire risk reduction work around their home. Another thing that's happened is in areas where there has been lots of wildfire that has caused lots of damages, insurance companies will not insure those properties going forward. So that's kind of two specific examples to wildfire, which working in natural resources education, I can look at the big picture view of everything. I see wildfire is just one example of the pie, agriculture is another example of the pie, and you've got lots of pieces of the pie and everyone's got their specific stuff. Just recently, there was a Building for Wildfire Summit up in Big Sky, Montana, and they brought in researchers from the Forest Service, from the Insurance Institute. They brought in fire chiefs from Vail, Colorado, and Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and to talk about preparing for wildfire. How do we do it? And that's one of the things that even here locally, if you look at Park County or parts of Gallatin County, commissioners and planning boards are beginning to look at, should we be requiring folks that want to live here and build here, should we be requiring them to meet certain specifications, whether it's subdivision layout, home construction materials, and they're looking at that. So that's just one example in the wildfire world of kind of the progression of trying to make a change through insurance, then trying to go through policy. I don't know what that means for the big picture of natural resources and agriculture, but that's one snapshot of things that could happen.
Since I brought up public policy, I feel I have to respond in part, but also just give it, I know I did speak about crop insurance, but it's not the only thing I ever did in my life. I'm an agriculture economist and natural resource economist, so I care about marketing and profitability a lot too, which is why I was interested in crop insurance in part. But just as an example, a livestock example, I'm currently working on a project trying to develop a project for the Blackfeet Nation in terms of livestock production that we have a very small piece in. And I studied the grass finished market for years. And you notice I said finished. I love that word better than fed, because all ruminants are fed grass at some point in their life. The point is they're finished on grass. And I think you brought this up in your talk, Bruce, that you have the great potential to develop that market. That market, I've been going back to it, is expanding, but it's tremendously small. It's maybe 3 or 4% of the market at best. And how to tap into that is extremely difficult when you have a very, what they call, thin market, and no one knows exactly what the prices are and where they're going and how to process them, and the whole bailiwick. But also 10 years ago, I worked on a public policy. It's just an example, federal policy. And we thought we changed a very simple rule, and it was that any state-inspected processing facility in the country could enter interstate commerce. We wanted to change that basic public policy. And I thought it would be really good for Montana if that happened. I worked 5 or 6 years on that policy. We got it passed, and then in the implementation, it all got screwed up. And it never really worked. And now they're trying to bring it back up again because there's a great potential, economic potential, as Bruce says, to develop that type of differentiated market. And finally, technology, and I know you might know something about this, Bruce. I will be publishing soon a first ATRA publication on blockchain and supply management, which is a very hot topic and very confusing, and it isn't Bitcoin. Don't get confused about Bitcoin and blockchain. It's about agriculture, but it gives the great possibility of really differentiating markets and getting higher prices for our products and getting profitability. So policy, and I'm on the state NRCS technical committee for 20 plus some years. And it's a constant dynamic going from the local level, the state level, to the federal level, to the state level. NRC probably embodies every level of public policy you can possibly imagine. This gentleman said, don't fit, I've worked years trying to make sure that programs like CSP and EQIP work well for Montana growers and modifying those practice standards. And I've spent many years on that issue. So we live in a democracy. And the wonderful thing about a democracy is everything can change. You just have to work at it. And it takes a very long time sometimes. No, that's a question at all.
Yeah, well, I was going to say we've got time for maybe one more. They've been at it for a little while.
My question for you is, you said to Montana ranchers and farmers and people who care about this issue, pressure us to develop tools to give you access to the knowledge that we're generating. What is the best way for Montanans to do that? Should they be emailing you? Should they be emailing their legislators? Should they be calling MSU, telling them to fund your department? What is the best way for them to pressure, to create pressure to get access to that data and knowledge?
Well, all the above. I mean, really, just from my perspective, I work for MSU Extension. My position is 100% grant funded. I don't have any other funding source. I patched together grant funding from the Western Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, the Northern Plains Climate Hub, Montana DNRC. Like for me, I'm the chair of the Montana Climate Science team for Extension, and I'm grant funded. So I'm always hunting. I've even found Montana Farm Bureau grants. So it's a challenge, definitely, to find funding, and our researchers, it's a challenge for them to find funding as well. My job is outreach and education. So these folks need to define the science and the research that I can share so that it's credible.
Well, I can say that we have a climate office in Montana that's not funded. They do it as a sidelight to their day job, which is being a professor. The Montana Climate Office is at the University of Montana. It used to be in the Montana Ag Experiment Station, but moved away. It wasn't taken away, it just went dormant and they grabbed it. That's not a bad thing. They're doing a great job in spite of, but on grants, on soft money, most of them federal. The state could step up there and really improve that system, I think. So that's an arena that really could use some help. As I said, the water monitoring aspect, really important. And the DNRC does a great job of working with that, the state agency. But they're kind of picking up the slack, frankly, of what's been dropped off the board from USGS. So there's some other areas where I think we can certainly encourage more of the research and more of this area of how do you bring that information down to the decision makers. And I think that's real crucial, and there's lots of steps in that. And we're thin in doing it. So you can email me anytime, you and 70 others per day. And about a third of those don't seem to take the weekend off. So I might not get back to you right away.
Yeah, I really don't have a lot to offer, except that, that's what we're here for, is we're here to serve you. One of probably our biggest challenges is how do we get the technical information out to the public and get it there in a way that they can make sense of it and actually apply it and improve their lives. And so that's a challenge for all of us in the room. It's probably one that, speaking as a person with no extension appointment, that we don't do as good a job as we do, but I never turn down an invitation to come talk to people either. And so
thank you, by the way.
Yeah, we're available.
I haven't, it's more of a comment, and it goes to those lines. You know, you do some really cool stuff at Montana State University. There's great research going on, but you hide your candle under a basket pretty well. A lot of that stuff, you write a lovely paper, you may distribute it to your peers, you may send it to the extension service, but nobody knows about it. There's a dozen ag shows and county fairs and things around the state where you can take that work out to the people and share that with them, what you're doing. Not only does it help them learn what that stuff is that you're doing, but it also helps them fund your programs as well.
And I'll jump on and say something else here. So I can say with complete confidence that people have a hard time still talking about the 7-letter word climate. And even the information that we have and we pass out, I see, like you said, we're good at hiding the candle under the basket. I get lots of emails every day, and then you read in the fine print near the bottom that there was this really cool research that was done, but we just got a blip about it in the update. We never see even the final report. You know, we'll send stuff out to our extension offices. I've got various products we developed in the last year through different grants. We both mail hard copies, electronic copies, send it to them. When you have one extension agent in a county that they're doing family consumer sciences, agriculture, natural resources, economic development, 4-H, they're stretched really thin. Stuff's gonna get missed. And so it's up to folks in the counties to really, if it's something you care about, tell your extension office. Because we have so many things that we get bombarded with on a daily basis that it's kind of like, well, what do we share? Well, we share the information that we got requested to share or people wanted. I have no background in family and consumer sciences, but people really wanted to learn how to can. So I pulled together a canning class, and I felt pretty excited that I pulled that off, and people survived. So far. So, I mean, that's what I encourage, like, you know, whether you're an individual, an organization like Farm Bureau, go talk to your extension office, and if you bug them enough, I know it's hard to catch us because we're out in the field, we're visiting people, we're talking to them, bombard us, tell us you want information on whatever that specific topic is, and we'll make a point to have it available to you. I just got a phone call from Plentywood last week. I've never gotten anyone calling me from Plentywood, but they wanted climate variability information, and I told them to call Bruce.
You send me emails.
Not Plentywood.
That's actually a great segue. I'm going to kind of interrupt here for a moment. Thank you, John, for setting that up. That actually sort of transitions us a little bit to the next session. But before I talk to you a little bit about what that's going to look like, please join me in thanking our panel this afternoon. So sorry to interrupt your conversations, although you will have the opportunity to continue those conversations here going forward, but just maybe in a slightly more directed way as we go on. So we wanted to take advantage of the fact that we've got a group of folks in the room who are on the ground and in the field and really engaged in doing the work on a day-to-day basis. And so we wanted to get some tabletop conversations going with all of you, really for two purposes. What we would like to be able to do with some of the main themes and answers to the questions that I'm going to pose to you is to compile those and give them back to the panelists and presenters through the remainder of the conference, just so they have some clearer or more extensive sense of the kinds of issues and concerns and questions that you all have, so that they can be kind of attuned to that. But the second thing that we want to be able to do with this is, again, compile those questions, those themes, the issues that you are concerned with, and use that as the basis to pull some additional information together and develop what I've been describing as kind of a white paper, but really to go out and gather more resources or gather more information if it's available, to reach back out to the panelists and to others, whether it's at MSU or elsewhere around the state or potentially even outside the state, to start to answer some of the questions that you have, maybe identify the resources that would be valuable to you and so forth. To John's question before the break about getting information from the university back out into the community, that's what we're trying to do here, at least to some degree. And so the information that we compile, any results that we're able to pull together, we'll directly disseminate to all of you here, but we're also going to ask that you make it available. We'll post it to our website, make it available to others as well, really with the aim of kind of going, well, look, there is good research out there. There's good information. There are other resources available. How do we help make that available? How do we disseminate it in a way that it's accessible to folks? So we really want to try to support those efforts as much as possible. So what we have planned for the next bit of time is to spend somewhere between maybe 40, 45 minutes and an hour, depending on how your conversation's going, asking each one of your tables to explore 4 different discussion questions. There are copies of these discussion questions on each of your tables. We'll leave them up here on the screen as well. But I'll just kind of walk through these quickly. So first question is, what kinds of weather-related or climate-related effects or impacts are you seeing in your operations? Just like you to talk a little bit, and this is one of the reasons I was asking you to try to sit with some folks that you may not necessarily know, so that you can get some different perspectives, different experiences. Kind of to Domo's question, or to Domo's reflection about the panels earlier about the possibility of bringing folks together to share their experiences. That's kind of the aim of this particular question. Second question then is, what sorts of resources are you already using or that you're aware of that are helpful as you try to respond to the experiences that you have, the conditions that you experience on your operations? What are the needs that you face? What kinds of resources or what sorts of gaps are there? And then finally, what would you like to see? What resources or information would be available, and from whom? So who does that come from? Is it those of us that are at MSU? Is it from USDA? Are there other private sector entities that have that information available? So those are the questions that we want to pose. What I'm going to ask of each of your groups is to first identify somebody who is going to be sort of a recorder and reporter from your table. So on your table, you'll see, I'm going to grab, there are 2 versions of this. Can I borrow that one, Kathy? So you have one page that looks like this. These are the questions. There is a second sheet on your table which has those same questions, but it has a little bit of space for whoever your reporter is to take some notes. Right? This is just a way for you to sort of capture the major questions, capture the major themes. The way that we'll use this is that at the end of this discussion today, we'll ask for 2 things. One is that we'll ask one of you from each table to take 2 or 3 minutes and report out what were the major topics, what did you talk about. I have a feeling this is going to be a game of not knows to figure out who is slowest and ends up having to be the reporter. I've never been at a group that is excited about being a reporter. Maybe that's wrong, but somebody needs to choose to be a recorder and a reporter. We will collect these, and we'll do 2 things with those. One of the things that we'll do really quickly tonight is I'll pull my staff and fellows together, and we'll sort of identify the major questions and themes, compile those into a single document, and get it back to the panelists and the speakers tomorrow so that they're aware of the kinds of things that you're interested in and that you've been talking about today. And then 2, we'll take these back as the basis of starting to put that white paper together. So your task is to choose a reporter and a recorder. I'd suggest maybe 10 to 15 minutes on each of these. I have a couple of colleagues. We'll kind of circulate through the room. If you get stuck, we'll help you kind of keep track of time. We'll kind of be paying attention too. If you kind of work through all of these a little faster than we anticipate and the energy in the room starting to die out, we'll reconvene and kind of report out sooner. If there's a lot of energy and the discussion goes on, we'll let you kind of go for a little while. But I'd suggest 10 to 15 minutes maybe for each of those questions. If it takes more or less, that's certainly fine as well. So does your task make sense? You know what you are being asked to do? All right, then I'm going to let you have at it. Thanks. So we want to take a little bit of time at this point. I think they're arguing over who has to report out. Take a little bit of time at this point to just go round robin and hear a little bit about your discussions. And I'm going to leave this up to each one of the tables to sort of decide how you want to do this. I'm going to ask you to try to keep it to sort of 2 to 3 minutes of the highlights. I think what I would be maybe most interested in hearing, but again, I'll leave this up to each table to decide how they want to go, would be to focus on the kind of the gaps, sort of the resources that you would benefit from, information, or other kinds of things that you'd like to have. And in that fourth question, who's out there, what would you like and from whom? So I'd encourage you to kind of focus on those things, but whatever else came out of your conversations, whatever themes or whatever questions came out of your conversations. So who would like to go first? And I'm gonna give this mic to folks partly so we can capture the audio. I'm not sure this is working super well, but there's a lapel mic on here, so we've got the audio for the video that we're capturing. Yeah, don't grab that part.
Well, I'll go first so I don't have to say what he said.
There you go. I'll let you hold on to that too.
Okay. Put this on here so I don't drop it. So our table was sort of unique, I think, in that we didn't have any producers on our table. We had a banker, a researcher, a landowner that's leasing agent, a reporter, and a representative from Senator Daines' office. So we had a different conversation, I think, than some. But based on that, some of the weather-related effects that we saw is the earlier snow melt, and that was pointed out by Jeff that actually started 10 years ago that they were seeing that. Banks having more risk involved in making their loans to producers, so that they were more wary because the weather is not as consistent. The farmer can't consistently produce that yield that he normally would. Resources that we would like to see, resources that we're aware of and using, and National Center for Appropriate Technologies, the USD, ATRA, the USDA climate change. I use NOAA, the weather prediction on NOAA and the climate change there. I also use the montanaclimate.org in my work. Biggest weather-related needs faced in your organization, and I ended up basically saying that the biggest weather needs we need in Montana is accurate local weather. It does me no good to know the weather in Great Falls, and they're using that same prediction for Conrad, which is 60 miles down the road. That's not local enough. We need a local weather system that I can use as an agronomist, that the grower can use to predict the weather, to know what his weather in that area is going to be. And then what would we like to see? As I told these folks, I use 5 different programs to try to track what's going on the farm. I have web pages that I go to in Texas, Washington, Minnesota, and I can't remember where the other places are, but they're all bookmarked that predict different things like rust, a disease that comes up out of the Gulf of Mexico. So there's a Minnesota that tracks how far that's coming up. That tells me when I need to be out in the field looking for rust and whether the farmer needs to spray for it. That would be really nice if that was all pulled together into one place, instead of me having to spend 7 hours doing this every week to know where we stand. Stream monitoring and monitoring of the weather being in a place where not just farmers can access it, because our banker brought that up as it would be nice to help him make decisions on loans, because then he'd be able to have a better prediction of what the water and the possibility, right? Is that how I'm saying it right? The possibility that the farmer is going to make that yield and pay him back. Okay? We'll leave the rest for other people to bring in. Next.
Over here.
over here.
He's our speaker.
Well, I'm not sure how I got nominated, but I told him I couldn't write, but I could speak. So I guess that's what happened. So anyway, we were under a similar situation. We had a lot of people who work with producers and one producer here. So I think on the first question, the biggest thing is what is normal? It's changing so erratically that we don't know what normal is anymore, I guess, is one of the things we saw about what's the weather-related effects and what's our climate-related effects. What sort of resources? Two or three of us were in the education business, so we have a whole list of resources that are available for people that probably we don't need to go through everything, but everything from USDA websites to some University of Nebraska has a really good climate planning, weather-ready program for farms and ranches that helps you think about how climate might affect your area. Again, it needs to be, it's mostly crops that are for those areas, but it'll help you think through it. We need it for Montana, so that's kind of on the need page too. And then there's some Farmer.gov helps you connect to resources like insurance for the problems that you do have, and there's a whole other list that we have that we won't go through in the time essence. What would you like to see? This is a pretty big dream, but a collaboration or a coalition of all of the agencies that were listed on that last page that got together and talked about things, so each unit isn't putting out the same thing in a different message and a different way. And it kind of goes to your comment earlier that it would help standardize things for Montana too, I think, particularly if we had local input to some of the federal information. So all of the USDA extension, the trade associations and everything, if there was some type of group that could help craft those messages and they were uniform instead of, and not everybody putting out the same message in just a different way, basically, I guess. What are the biggest needs? What we talked about, I guess, or the biggest needs facing your operation, we summarized it by, for lack of a better word, marketing, but making agriculture's issues and these types of weather-related problems sexy, because we have trouble getting our message out to people, and the general public doesn't. The only reason we make news is because we had the earliest snowstorm in Montana. When else is Montana going to get mentioned in the national news? Particularly like if we think back to the 2000 to the 2005 horrific drought, how many people across the U.S. could tell you that it affected the economy, it had drastically affected the economy in Montana. So that was kind of what we summarized as our biggest needs. We had a lot of other issues, but there's a lot of other tables to get to too. So I'm just going to pass it around.
So we had a pretty diversified panel. It was a really good discussion. We had a reporter, a nonprofit representative, a representative from Senator Tester's office / producer, a trade group representative / producer, and an extension personnel / producer. So pretty diversified. Like most of Montana, everybody's wearing 2 or 3 hats. What kind of weather-related effects or impacts are you seeing? Basically a shift of the climate on the calendar, a little bit of the weather cycling back to the 60s and 70s with colder winters here recently, especially up north. A lot of that being offset with no-till and leaving more stubble, which is protecting the winter wheat a little better. Resources that we are using or that we're aware of, machinery changes, better no-till systems. We're able to adjust our seeding dates or plant new varieties due to a lot of research out there, including MSU research, trying to alleviate some of the spring rush with Willow Creek winter wheat forage variety, trying to develop a new winter barley variety to help farmers out with their spring rush. Snow-tail reporting for irrigation water. The Agromet system's really good for irrigation systems. Weather forecasts, a shout out to the Great Falls NOAA, especially for things like their young livestock alerts that they have during snowstorms like the last one we just had. More efficient irrigation systems that the federal government like FSA and NRCS are cost sharing. What are the biggest weather-related needs you face in your operations? So this was basically what they were really looking for. A lot of it comes down to, as it was mentioned before, accurate weather forecasting, so you can plan for a crop year. It was noted, and we will point out there, kind of a side note, and we did tell Jesse about this, that every time the windmills up on the Bull Bench north of Fairfield are spinning, the Doppler radar out of Great Falls is recording 1/3 of an inch of rain on Mitch's farm every day. And so sometimes we're getting a little too sensitive with our technology. We need to kind of pull that background out a little bit. The other one that came up, I think that might be a little interesting from the producer standpoint, is a real free market that allows us to fully utilize our rotational crops and livestock products. We do have a lot of farmers, especially farmers that would like to integrate those alternative crops, pulse crops, and things like that, and we've really lost those markets, and we would like to get those markets back so we continue to put that rotational system back in. What would you like to see, or what resources or information would you use? A lot of us just agreed that we're headed in the right direction with weather data collection and forecasting. We just need to keep improving on the direction that we're heading. So.
Lockie Edwards with the Montana Grains Foundation and a wheat producer up in the Big Sandy country. We had some disagreement on our table, which is normal. So what kinds of weather-related effects or impacts are you seeing in your operations? And a big one on that list was introduction of new cropping systems for diversity and soil health and to take advantage of varying weather. We did disagree on whether we're having drier springs with later rains or wet springs and dry summers. And Montana's a big place and has always been thus. There's a movement to fall planted crops and some to cope with wet springs, too wet to plant, others to avoid hot, dry summers. But nonetheless, there is a demand out there for more types of crops to be fall planted. What sorts of resources are you using? We disagreed here too. Weather forecasts are far better, or they're not. Yeah. A better network of weather stations would be good. I frankly use a lot of the Weather Underground system, but they have their problems, and Bruce indicated there may be an expansion of the Mesonet system, which would be helpful. I think a major resource is the MSU research data. It's well publicized in local publications and at Research Center field days. I think that gets out there quite well. What are the biggest weather-related needs you face? That's precision equipment, no-till equipment, cutting-edge stuff like green seeker and that sort of thing, if they can get that fixed. And then there's drought-resistant crops. Luther Talbert hit a home run with his Stay Green gene in Vida, and it has at least taken the Triangle and a good share of Montana by storm as far as spring wheat goes. The gaps would be rain on demand, as Vince mentioned, but also education on how to use data. There's so much data, and it is so elusive to collate. What would you like to see, or what resources would you use? And that, there again, cropping rotation data, if that could be somehow put in order and wrapped together so that it would read like a good book, that would be good. A good Wi-Fi system for our farms that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. Better 6 to 12 month weather forecasting again. And winter crops, winter canola, barley, winter everything. Better research funding for ag, and biotechnology for crops, which has been lagging. So that's what we had.
Okay. I don't know whether we were the most productive table, but we sure had a lot of fun though anyway. So lots of great discussions here. And we had a variety of people, producers, some working more in the water resource area, some just in more of a natural resources, sort of an extension role. So kind of a broad variety of ideas. I don't know if we all agreed on every little thing, but I will read what our good secretary here wrote down, or tried to. First one, what kinds of weather-related effects or impacts are you seeing? Okay, climate variability, right on topic for what this is all about. But as we see it, it's something that we've always had, probably something we're always going to have. How are we going to live with it? What can we do to make the most of it? Whether it's a change for the better or a change for the worse, Mother Nature is going to do its thing. So we have to adapt to it. Reduce moisture, but we do have better tools now. I've heard some stuff about the way we crop now. Our grain producers doing such a much better job now than probably in the 80s. So we can modify. We just need to have the tools to do it and the knowledge how to do it right, what not to do. Talked a little bit about different color hides on cattle. And to be fair to our black ones here, since we have an Angus guy, there's times of the year when the black hide is probably better, times of the year when the black hide probably isn't as good. Works against them a little bit in the hot summer. But in the winters, why, maybe better. In the summer, we'll say they can always go find a water hole if they're out on the range. So, but, and then we look at how much farming has changed, as we just mentioned. Then on the ranch side of the things, probably just means that good range management is going to be more important than ever, and that has changed so much, or a lot. We used to think we had really good range management things, take half, leave half, and then it keeps getting more sophisticated. I see Tim shaking his head there, now nodding, so I guess we're on target there. But yeah, just these concepts are so much more important than they used to be as the weather gets to be more of a challenge and not as responsive as we'd like it to be. Earlier runoff, that was another issue, but there again, we're just going to have sometimes, we talked about that in the legislature somewhat, maybe, and in our water interim committee about maybe we're going to have to reduce some of the irrigation laws, how soon you can get in there. In other words, if you got more heat early on and less moisture early on, maybe we need to change the rules and regulations about how soon you can get into the and start using your irrigation waters. Make more use out of what we have. May not have any more to work with, but maybe it should be spaced out a little bit differently. Now, what sorts of resources are you using or aware of that are helpful to respond? Kind of all agreed that our TV weather station reports were really, really important. But some stress the fact that They need to be on your cell phones so that you can get it out in the field. Probably very, very true. Then that brings up another thing is, our broadband reception, our phone service out in the rural areas, and even close to some of the areas closer to town. Sometimes they're as bad as they are out in the really rural areas that have been really working hard on getting broadband everywhere. So just keep that in mind. Our ag research stations, all the different work they have done on whether it's on crops or like Miles City has done so much on fire research and one thing and another. They play such a valuable role in what we can access, what we can learn from, that type thing. Another thing that was brought up, kind of would have went right over my head because I don't Twitter or tweeter or whatever, but the young people do. So that has to be a component. I think somebody said it was a third at least rely mostly on that. Us Facebook users are out of style already, so it's brutal out there, folks. We talked a little bit about the old undaunted stewardship, which Brent was a part of way back when, and that's kind of went by the wayside, but we do have some really nice conservation awards through Stock Growers University and whatnot, and our NRCS services that encourage people to get out there, do good things, whether it's stream bank renovations or enhancements, whatever. It's all really good stuff from a conservation point of view, and we just need to recognize it, promote it, and sell the public that, yeah, good things are happening out on the range front and on the crop front. What are the biggest weather-related needs you face in your operation? What gaps do you feel exist in the available information? I guess better weather information in a state with so many microclimates. Never really thought about that myself, but I guess Montana is a state with an awful lot of microclimates, so that puts a real challenge on the weather forecasters to identify them to do us the most good. There's also the fact was brought up is that probably not Montana so much, but maybe it'll be coming here too. If you get, we had one young lady here from Colorado, and if you're near Denver, rain is pretty much bad most of the time, especially if it's on a weekend. And you just don't get that farm perspective that you can really rely on, that you kind of need to make the most of a lot of situations. Here again, better broadband and cell service in rural areas. 3 to 6 month forecasts would be a good thing. But how accurate they'd be, a lot of us probably don't have a lot of faith in that yet, but it'd be a wonderful goal if it could happen. I guess something else that we don't have down here that I forgot at our Water Interim Committee, we did talk about weather modification, cloud seeding. Some of the folks in southwestern Montana have done some pretty extensive work on this. So has places up in Canada, getting back to that Canadian tie-in, and city of Calgary, up there, the insurance companies are even paying for it because it can help out with hail. So there are some new frontiers out there that we need to be aware of and keep on top of. Could do us some good down the road. What would you like to see, or what resources, information would you use? Example, what organizations? One thing we need to do as producers, I know the extension people and the research people, all of us are saying, how can we get out and reach more people? I think our people, my fellow producers, need to get off our duffs and seek out some of this stuff. I don't know how many times we've had some good extension people come and you just can't get the turnout you'd love to get, and it gets frustrating and you're wasting resources. And I think we as producers have to step up to the game a little bit too, and maybe be more aggressive in what we seek out, what we utilize, and how we utilize our good people on the research stations and through the extension department. Planning resources, getting back to the broadband in rural areas so folks have access, better cell phone service, better cell phones. I guess they should be getting better. The prices darn sure going up on them. We just we just got our latest cell phones after about 8 years, so it's like yikes. Research stations are developing more, so other things is our research stations, especially on the crop field, are continually developing new strains, new varieties, and like our research stations, doing more work on, droughts, fires, that type thing. How do you reclaim the range after a bad fire? And they've done quite a bit on this that they've got already. And then we did talk about one thing, trying to reach out, get to people, and understanding that maybe we should be doing it through our 4-H kids. Work through the 4-H department, the extension department, get them. We just had a great display at Harlowtown here about a month ago with the NRCS on how rain is utilized on different soil types, that type thing. Maybe that's something that we could get our county agents to have and even make it a 4-H project through the 4-H people. I'm probably sticking my neck way out here, but who do parents listen to, and especially grandparents listen to? It's their grandkids. So this could be a valuable way to get some of this information out there. So with that, that was our good times.